But yeah, dude, I feel you. I when I got that thing, one of the first things I did was start playing around. It has all these like kind of gimmicky modes, and one of them is like active track.
So it just follows you around wherever you're at.
And I was in this park in Petaluma with Forrest DeSanti, shout out.
Big up.
And I clicked follow on me, and I started running around, and the drone started chasing me. And I immediately got this like atavistic animal panic of like being chased by a predator, and it was like very uncomfortable.
Oh, that's so scary.
And there was like a moment where I had to like turn it off, and like it was like a Black Mirror moment. Like I just felt like I was like, oh shit, this is what it would feel like to get chased by a robot predator, you know?
Sounds scary.
It was a little scary.
But... I mean, yeah, like just being like stared down by like the lidless eye of the screen machine like that sounds pretty intimidating.
It was.
Yeah.
And this was my own purchased device.
I brought this into my own house, and
what
now
have
it's
I
chasing
done?
me.
But
that's hilarious.
I mean, I think as a videographer, I love the drones, and it's opened up what we can do as artists like so much.
That seems true, right?
But the unfortunate thing about it is that the early adopters, I think, really abuse the technology. So the national opinion or the public opinion on them is justifiably negative.
For sure. I mean, you'll get a ticket if you run it in a national park, right?
Which I totally I agree, and I get it. But like learning to fly my drone was very difficult because there's only a couple places in the bay that I can fly it. And then most of those places are filled with people who are like understandably not down.
Would prefer if it wasn't happening there. Yeah.
So
that's fair.
And I'm always sensitive when I'm taking off in a public place. Like it sounds like a swarm of angry bees. And I get that people have very real privacy concerns. And, you know, I try to be a little more outgoing and gentle and friendly about it when I must launch my digital beast.
I've had people a couple times when I've been surfing, they've flown pretty close over me, and at first I used to always flip them off, and now I just make a kissy face.
That's amazing. Hell yeah, dude.
I feel like if you could embarrass people or like help people know that what they're doing is being seen, then that's like the whole thing with the internet, right? It's like the amount of anonymity lets people just be washed.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have to look someone in the eye every time you're going to do something stupid, you're going to think twice about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And it's funny how like this plays out again and again in like forums, the last great frontier of the internet, where people are like kind of by default incredibly nasty and antagonistic until you come at them as a real person. You're like, hey, like, what's up? Like, you know, usually people like revert back to, oh, like I'm going to be real, you know. I at least this is what I've heard from.
I've never been there.
Yeah.
I do feel like courtesy is an art form, though.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's funny you bring that up. I just finished reading The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, yeah.
For my third time. I love that book.
Pretty epic story, really.
Yeah. But the thing that's, you know, I learn something new every time I read it. A good book like that does that. This time around, I was really taken by the rules of etiquette in like the French court.
Decorum's heavy there. Yeah.
Like circa 1850s, 1830s. And you know, I think the like general modern inclination is to be like, oh, look at how primitive these people were. Like these forms are so antiquated and outdated.
Right, just so much extra words and obsequiousness, politeness.
Totally. And
hella rigid caste structures.
For sure. But I gotta say, this time, in the current state that we're in right now, where like we're like nobody really knows how to interact with each other, I felt like there was like a deep cultural wisdom to the rules of etiquette. It was like almost like there's a level of intimacy that is not granted. Like familiarity is not granted explicitly in the outset of an interaction.
Right.
So all these characters have like the rules of courtesy actually allow them to exist and build group safety in these really complex environments. And then in order to get to like a deeper level of familiarity, that has to be earned through regular experience and exposure and trust, the building of trust. And I think in our modern culture, like so many people are adrift of like, how do I behave? How does a man act in this? How does a woman act in this? How do others act in this? And there's at the same time almost an assumption that like radical openness is always something that the other can accept or should be able to accept or should be able to react to in a way that isn't confrontational or painful
or maybe even is positive for everyone involved.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, as a perpetual oversharer who has had to learn, pacing, I was looking at this structure and being like, there's some wisdom here to like the utility of like courtesy as this kind of social tool of like, going to a party, maybe there's this natural social anxiety. It's almost like courtesy is like this amazing kind of shield or operating manual that allows you to navigate the intricacies of the social fabric. And
like just to be aware of your surroundings compels a certain kind of headspace, right? You're like, oh, if I know where I'm at, then I'm going to make decisions differently than if I'm just charging right through.
Yeah, totally.
I had a hilarious experience trail running a couple of months ago, and I like came up on some horses, but I was fully in the zone and wasn't really checking my surroundings. And I came around the corner and kind of came up on these two folks coming out of Five Brook stables, like on like just sort of frumpy older folks on horses, and their animals got kind of startled and freaked out, and I kind of panicked a little bit too because I hadn't really been checking myself. So that was like the recent instance for me of being like, oh yeah, no, you gotta be on game. Like, how is your behavior affecting the environment you're in? I mean that dovetails with nets hella well because it's how tied to the net you are. Like any movement you make is reflected in the fabric.
Right. Yeah, these ripples.
Yeah, you think about like the fabric of society and all that other type of whatever that look, right? It's like, oh, like what I do like influences things around me that I might not be able to see.
Right. Yeah, if you got a boy, your boy's on the other end of the net doing a complex weave and you make a movement.
Oh, for sure, while we're working. Yeah, that's a whole thing of just like letting people know when you're about to get up while we're actually in the flow weaving.
Yeah.
So you can get your finger pinched or like you end up losing some tension, tautness is the main thing we're going for.
Right. Which I would imagine in your experience of developing net building, you've also, whether intentionally or just intuitively have had to develop a system of communication, an etiquette, if you will, a netiquette, for like, how do I, give a heads up to the homie who's doing a weave that I'm about to stand up? How do I do it in a way that doesn't threaten, challenge, provoke? Like, which often is just a intuitive thing, the tone of your voice, the joke that you say, that, there's like all this human interaction that is like, we're so highly attuned and sensitive to the groupthink and to the tribal mind space. But when you sit back and look at it, it's like, we've never given up etiquette. We've never given up these social rules. They've just grown and changed. And even in something as seemingly, informal as a net build, there's still rules of etiquette.
100%. I mean, an important way to think about what it is it's stored kinetic energy. Like every strand that goes in, there's more tension that's added, and it gets tauter and tauter and tauter as it coalesces. And that all stays in there. And so like the headspace that you're in while you're weaving is very much reflected in it. The amount of focus and persistence is kind of captured by the net, right? And that's why it's so fun to do, because you can be in this flow state. It's a flow state art form in that sense of you get in the zone and you just start rolling or whatever. We've been using the phrase weaving, but that might not even actually be the most accurate term. And that's part of what's so fun about it is we're just completely inventing jargon along the way.
Right.
We already hella love for slang, obviously, so we've just been bringing a lot of slang in.
Nice.
A lot of context gets layered and layered on some of these words that we're using.
You got any examples for me? Some good new net slang?
Well, we've definitely been on this flex recently to try and replace the word tight with taut.
Nice, dude.
Like as just general in the language, right? Tautness has a way more sort of dynamic tension in it. It's a way more sort of collaborative energy, where tightness is like a little bit more stuck, a little bit more constrained, you know? So the move from tight to taut is definitely that's one that we're really happy about.
Taut could even be tight, like with a like heavy Cali accent. Like, bro, that's hella taut, bro. So taut.
That's a really good way to put it. Yeah. But it's basically the whole project is how do we just bring more attention to doing it cutty in a good way, you know?
I love that.
Because like the art form obviously comes out of the woods, out of sort of like secret clandestine moves, and now we're trying to do it at this really professional, engineered, really elevated level. And so to have the overlap between the professional and underground sort of interaction it's a strange thing to try and bridge, but it's also super fun. So that's where I'm at with it right now. It's just like the actual process of doing it is super engaging and pulls on a lot of threads. Like the way I've had to learn hell of different skills to be able to get good at it, and also skills that I'm passionate about have all increased in just the amount of experience I have with them now, and thus literally the interweaving of all these different layers of my life. The craft is becoming a craft in that sense of like we're actually deploying skills that have been practiced over years at this point, and also being able to refine that as each iteration, right? Every new piece we do is the flagship piece.
Right. It's bringing it to the next level.
Yeah.
It's so cool because I think I see similarities in the work that I've been doing, where it's like every new project is like the best project I've done.
Exactly.
And I became aware of that recently, like how stoked and grateful I am to be getting to do a style of work where it's like every time I do it, I'm getting better, but I'm also like having a piece to represent where I'm at in that moment, the culmination of my efforts, my life knowledge. It's not that like I don't make mistakes, but like even in the mistakes, you start to, when you become like married to the craft, you stop seeing it as like them so much as obstacles and more as like opportunities to apply creativity. You do that 100 times and it becomes part of the weave.
For sure.
And it's not like a negative thing at all. It's like actually something I get stoked on now. I'm like, oh, this thing that used to stress me out so much now is like an opportunity for me to innovate. And a lot of times like my favorite things that I produce come from those moments.
Perspective's everything.
Perspective's everything.
No lie, that's really what the slogan's going to be. It's like, like how you look at what you're doing matters.
What was the other slogan too? There's perspective is everything. And
chillin' ain't easy.
Chillin' ain't easy. I know that might have to be the episode.
Yeah, exactly. That's like getting the graphic dialed on that. Like that's a pretty critical font that we're gonna.
Chillin' ain't easy.
Yeah, it's somewhere between like ancient, kind of like calligraphy, like old like illuminated texts type of calligraphy. Somewhere between that and like a dope street tag.
Okay.
Yeah,
I like that. I wanted to ask you, because this is a question that both will serve this conversation, but also me personally in my life. Because
let's go there.
The nice thing about having a podcast is I get to make art, but I also get to like serve my own selfish needs in making my art. I encounter this often because I like to bring people to tree nets. Some of them your tree nets. And I'm always aware of how clunky my descriptions of what a tree net is to someone who has no visual concept in their mind of what one is.
Yeah, direct experience.
So in the master's words, when you are describing to a newbie who's never seen a tree net before, what is a tree net? How would you describe that?
Right. I feel like the elevator speech version has had so many versions at this point. Part of what I like about doing this is that it's difficult to describe what it is, even as I've become really good at it. The thing about it that matters to me is the point of view shift. Just our feet aren't on the ground. We have a different point of view on the spot that we're in. Sort of the opportunity to feel a new perspective is what it is. Like that's what this is. Like the product is the experience that you've never had before. But that is a really awkward sell because it doesn't make any sense if you just say like, do you want to try something you've never tried before?
Yeah.
But it's going to take like 3 weeks and it's kind of expensive.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. That I don't know, somewhere, but like, there's just a lot of different sort of taglines and the jargon fits in there, but somewhere between, it's like the psychedelic love child of a hammock and a trampoline.
Okay.
That's been like one of the, because all of those words evoke very specific images. Different for everybody, but like that idea of two things that are familiar, kind of tripping out and like creating children, like that, that this is a version of what that is.
Yeah.
You know? Textile. It's a textile art. It's a place for nature connection and like meditation. Like it's the ultimate spot to chill if being close to nature is your plan.
I love that. Do you find that your definition changes when it's a potential client versus like a homie? Let's say you have a homie come visit from another country and you're like, I'm going to take you to a tree net today.
Oh yeah.
And they're like, what is that? Does that definition change?
That's a really good question. I feel like the language of it has been part of what the art is for me because it is so much a craft of action. Like I've just been doing this for so long. I'm so steeped in it that the words that make sense to me are so far into the craft that they wouldn't necessarily be that understandable if you're coming at it from having never understood it before.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, for sure, that's been a really interesting part of the whole process is like, how do we talk about what this is in a way that doesn't give away all of what's cool about it? Because a lot of what's cool about it is the stuff you figure out on your own by being in it.
Right.
And so the direct experience, the immediacy of being in an environment or in a situation that you've never been in before, like the sense of sort of excitement and like aliveness that comes from that is actually the thing that we're offering.
Right.
Like the net is, the better we get at actually creating the nets, the less they are the main thing. And it's more about the environment and the culture and the sort of headspace of digging the tree, right? It's like, oh, wow, we're like up amongst this tree right now. Like, this is cool. This is a very taut situation.
It's like the experience of spending most of your life hanging out around the ankles. And now we're getting to climb up into like the armpit and the shoulders of the giant.
I've been thinking about it in a similar sense too, in terms of memory of like the fabric, like the nets themselves, like the patterns or not patterns that are emerging out of these as we're learning to create them looks like patterns in nature, right? Like fascia in our bodies, like throughout all your muscles, this whole sort of wetsuit skin that we have under our skin outside of our muscles is a elastic material that allows a lot of the shape of our bodies and the flexibility and resilience in our bodies, and the nets look like that and they respond like it too, to have that sort of dynamic bounce, like, and the reverberation that's in it, like the way that it has rebound. That's a pattern in nature. If you like zoomed in real close underneath the cambium layers of trees, you'd find textiles or sort of membranes that are very much like that. If you lay on the ground and look up into the trees, it has that.
It's the fractal nature of reality manifest through weaving.
And that's a tricky thing to explain. What we're doing is we're building fabric that looks like the patterns in nature for you to chill on, to remember that you are also part of nature.
You're a pattern. Dude, that's the most psychedelic definition. I love it.
Yeah, it's
because I usually just say it's a spider web of climbing rope.
Yeah, totally.
I think I like yours.
Well, because again, it's perspective, right?
Yeah, totally.
That framework makes a lot of sense to anyone who has a deep connection with nature and has spent a lot of time or is familiar with anatomy or biology.
Mm-hmm.
Something we've really been realizing as we've gotten more adroit with how we do these and how we create them and the whole process that they are, is that there's a different entry point for every single person that makes sense for them to approach what this is. And so part of the courtesy that we're thinking about a lot is to not try and spoon feed everyone all the dopeness. It's like, no, just we're doing something that's cool. You should check it out.
Yeah.
And when you check it out, you're going to have the experience that you have. And that's,
you got to experience it to experience it.
Yeah. It's the, it's sort of like the definition of cuttiness, right? It's like the spot that you can't find unless you know where it is, right? It's an experience and a headspace that becomes very evident as you interact with it.
Mm.
But to describe it or to capture it we've had a hard time just even taking pictures of it that communicate that vibe, right?
It is a very difficult to... it's like, I've noticed that right away, is that pictures really are insufficient. A 2D image is kind of insufficient to show what it is, because so much of it is its use case.
100%.
And you can take micro photos of sections of it, but the macro shots, there's so much light coming through that it's, you almost need to set it up, with lights, or, there's probably a way to do it, but the natural casual use, and almost by design, right? It's part of the effect is that you're seemingly suspended in the air. Right.
Well, that's a thing that is also difficult to explain, but
keep going. I'm going to adjust the light levels.
But because there's no pattern, every single cell has its own shape. There's no pattern for your eye to settle on. And that's why you can see through it. There's no surface in that sense. And this net's sick because it has the color combo, so it really helps it stand out. But when we do the real proper camo, it literally disappears. You almost can't even see it. And that matters for reasons we're still learning how to explain, which is cool. I like that. Where a lot of the sustainability is for me is the fact that we get better at it every time we do it. And every time I interact with the craft, I'm like, oh, here's this list of 5 things I want to improve or refine, or look at this cool thing that happened by accident, that, like what you were saying earlier, right? Like what's at first seemed like a mistake, a few more steps into the process, you can look back on and be like, oh, if we had done this on purpose at this point, then the whole game would be different and we'd be really stoked. And so every project, there's a refinement and an expansion that's possible. And that's partially because the process is such an organic process. It's not something that it has a writer's manual to it. It's literally the synthesis of everything we've learned at the cutting edge every time. And that's why it's been a weird business to make, because you're investing in us improving our aptitude for this thing that hasn't really been done before. And that feels really exciting.
Yeah.
It's also like confusing. Like it makes the relationship to audience really strange, because literally anybody could be stoked on Nets for any reason. It's literally just a space. Like all we're doing is just chilling in this spot.
Right.
Most of history, this spot was just a spot in the air.
Yeah, yeah.
And now we're chilling here. And that's cool. And the reasons why it's cool are a conversation that are for us to have right now, or for anybody else to have that comes and chills here.
For sure.
Right? And the concept of making a space that's explicitly for kicking it is it feels like something that's worthwhile in these times of like so much like fastness and franticness in the world. Like, what if we just had a dedicated spot where chilling was the main event? Like, there's nothing to do here except for think, sit quietly, feel your body, be in connection to the world, be in connection to the trees, feel the kinetic kind of relationship to life.
Mm-hmm.
Because the pattern of the fabric looks like the patterns that are the fabrics in our bodies that are in, it's whatever, art imitates life, imitates art, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, chilling ain't easy.
Chilling ain't easy. I mean, it's like, well, that's the other thing is like they're a ton of work.
Yeah.
Like, it's not easy to do.
And a lot of them too. I mean, I've been in several of your nets, and the one we're in is maybe the most accessible one that I've sat in.
It's for sure true.
But a lot of them, and especially growing up in the valley, there was a couple tree nets that were like legit dangerous to get to. I remember
those weren't the ones I built though.
Yeah, no, I know they.
Well, the ones that are sketchy are.
But I remember this one in particular that it was like you had to climb another tree about 15, 20 feet, transfer to a rope, and then you had to freehand up the rope with your legs on the redwood, and it was like this army hoist. And I remember being like 16, 17, 18 years old, and I would have to psych myself up because it's full commitment. Like, once you put your hands on that rope, you're going up, and you got to be able to have the mental fortitude to muscle your way up to that first branch, or else you're falling. And, I think someone did end up eventually falling and hurting themselves. But like, the chilling wasn't easy, but it was worth it getting to the top. Because once we got in that net, it was like, oh, this is the fruits of our labor. This is like such an amazing and unique experience. And
the must-send situation.
Yeah, the must-send situation. And I think that it certainly informed, I'm guessing you as well, that life experience of encountering, others' nets at various levels of accessibility and sketchiness have gone into how you think about creating yours, right? Because like you were just saying, when you do a consultation with a new client and they show you the space they're thinking about, this is such like a cutting edge. There is no manual. There is no regulation. They're putting their trust in you to like assess the space and be like, this is how we're going to design it so that you can experience it safely, so that, your kids can experience it safely.
For sure.
So, I'm curious, like, how did you first get into net making? What was that journey? How did that journey begin?
I think I could probably hit both those questions or both those thoughts with like the adventure and the sort of vigorous aliveness of climbing super burly trees. And I mean, that was the whole thing, obviously, when we were kids, with like mountain biking and finding the hardest tree to climb, climbing it, being up there, being like, wow, we just risked our lives to get here. Like, that was so fun. Like, how could we chill here more? And like that sort of excitement of that translating that into a place that's safe and like in your backyard, you could turn your kids loose on. Like, the net is still the same type of, the concept is still the same, but it's just been deployed now in a zone that is way more attainable for most people. Like, most people aren't trying to go hella far to the woods and take serious risks with their health for an adventure. It's a good thing to do. There's rite of passage aspects of it. Like, when we were young, it was the right thing to do.
It's a young man's game.
Push our edges, go far, like, yeah, hazard some risk to ourselves in order to have these experiences that were sort of threshold, game-changing experiences that got us really stoked and kept us really sort of energized and feeling of really being on the edge of your aliveness, right? Like, I'm fully here right now to do this, because if I am not, then you're in trouble. So you got to like translate that focus and that attentiveness and be able to have enough able-bodiedness too. And that's one of the cruxes too of the wild nets, is they're not accessible. And so part of our whole mission with the project is building them beautifully and professionally so that everybody's grandma and grandkids can also chill on a net and be totally safe and just have fun, but still experience some of that elation and that like the sort of sense of wonder. Really, it's like that feeling of being amazed is one of the coolest feelings that human beings get to experience. Like, wow.
Yeah.
Like to have an experience that you've never had, or to be able to interact with some surface or some structure or some element of life that is astonishing to you. That's the feeling that comes from that is something that is really special and kind of precious, right? It's like the reason we go to concerts. It's the reason we do risky things. It's the reason so much sort of adventure and travel takes place, right? And so to be able to create an environment where that feeling can exist, that's also tranquil and elegant, that feels like a really cool combo.
Chilling ain't easy, but it can be.
Chilling ain't easy. Exactly. That's why you pay us.
Yeah.
We'll make it easy for you by doing all the hard work ourselves.
What was your experience though? Like when you first, like how did you come into net building? Like we talked about
for sure
exploring the wild nets, but like when did that translate into you making your first net, and what was that experience like?
Like as far as jumping into it as like a profession, quote unquote.
We can get to that, but I'm just curious, like how it all started. Like,
I mean, I for sure have some pretty good early childhood memories with G Money and my brother cruising around, and just that was where the idea, like the concept or the sort of the premise of using rope to create surface came from my brother and from G Money doing that back in the day. And that was like, I mean, I forget, I think it was like Kristen or somebody in the like Anderson family circle was connected somehow to Julia Butterfly Hill and the sort of redwood tree protests and the sort of inspiration of using trees as a venue to make a stand for nature, as like a kind of political stance or as like a activist move, right? Like protecting old growth redwoods is a really good idea, and it actually took people risking their lives for the conversation to reach a level where it happened, right? And barely in time, right? There's so few old growth around anymore, so there's like a huge debt of gratitude to those people who did that work, right? And I felt like we were super inspired by those stories, because when that was all happening, we were just groms, right? I was 8 or something.
Yeah.
Like way too young to really understand why it mattered, and also too young to be able to participate.
Yeah, it was like a story through
that
I was handed through the elder generation that I was like still too young to personify identify with personally.
This really matters, and one day you'll know why.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And so I feel like it was a combo of that, of sort of like the inspiration of knowing that people ahead of us had really put their sort of hearts on the line for something that they really believed in, that was about why trees are important. And then as I was coming of age myself, really finding the direct encounter of trees being hella meaningful in my life, right? Like, oh wow, to go walk all day and climb a big tree and catch that view at sunset and have those so super quiet, really beautiful moments of just rest or sort of being held. Like, it's like some of the most intimate relationships in my life are with trees, right? Like there's certain trees that I go and climb where it's like my Winnie the Pooh thinking spot.
Yeah.
It's like, I know who I am in a lot of ways by the relationship I have with these beings that had been living a long time before I was born and will be here for a while after I'm gone. And just the kind of, I don't know if continuity is the right word, but there's something meaningful about that. And I guess like why that's meaningful is a big part of the whole craft here. It's just like, let's create an opportunity to spend more time being quiet next to these ones that have a lot to share, right? I mean, all the obvious woo-woo science of like, of course they give us oxygen, all these things, like they're living beings that share this landscape, or we share it with them, right? Because they're the elder.
And I really felt what you said about the holding. When part of my experience in taking people to nets and climbing is that, sometimes you get people that have never climbed a tree before.
Yeah.
And they're very scared and nervous. And the things that I always say to them,
we got some birds chilling with us right here.
Birds chilling with us. The thing that I always say to them is that, the tree, when you climb a tree, the tree's like climbing you back. Like when I get up in a tree, like I feel embraced. Even if I'm not in a net and I'm just like in the branches, I feel the tree kind of like there is like a kinetic force that's holding me in there. And then the second thing I tell them is like, one of the most beautiful things about tree climbing is becoming incredibly, like instantly aware of how amazingly designed your body is for doing this thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like you won't look at your hands the same way again. You get up in a tree and you're like, oh, this is like exactly what my arm was made to do, is like hang up in these branches.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my body knows exactly how to move in this thing. And most people that I take up, like, they're like, oh, yeah, I got this. I'm like, yeah, like your whole body has evolved for millions of years to do this one activity that almost nobody does anymore. And it's really, I think that's one of the most beautiful parts of some of the nets that are up in trees, is like that journey up, the climbing of the mountain, this trial that, as young men, we tested ourselves with. I know that I was very aware of climbing some of those trees and the question being, can you make it to the top?
Oh, yeah.
And answering that question for myself, is this going to be the time that I fall? No, I got it. I'm strong, It's like swimming across a lake. Can I still swim across the lake?
All the way across.
Yeah, and back?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got this. I'm going to will myself there. Like, that was so important as a young man to test myself in that way. And I think it's a worthy practice for anyone who's up to the task,
I mean, it's not for everyone, but if you're there, it really can take you a long way, I feel like risk assessment is like a tricky phenomenon in these times because there's so much more vigilance against it in general in the world. And so, I mean, that's another reason why doing it at this more fine art level feels appropriate, because it's creating a situation where the feeling can really exist that isn't dangerous.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh yeah, like come chill on a net and you'll get a pretty good sense of what it feels like to be up in a tree. But you can run around and flop and bounce and like
lean back,
lounge and read a book. Yeah, you can cuddle and you can take naps. You can build your bed here, right? Chilling and reading a book. Stuff that we couldn't really do when we were kids because we'd be all gripped up, just having the exhilaration of the experience.
Totally.
But I feel like, I think about it in those terms less and less now, because that is the thing that we're providing, right? Like that feeling is what the nets allow. And so I'm more and more just, my focus is on the process of creating it, just making it beautiful, making it safe, making it hella fun. Like the process of doing it. Like when we build nets, it's a great time. We got like a crew of homies that are coming together to be focused and be ninjas and be a team. There's tons of just meditative long hours of just focused handwork. It's a funny kind of job because it oscillates between just like a job, right? We're like, we got to like get all this stuff. We got to process this stuff. We got to load it in the truck. We got to transport it there. We got to get set up. And then once we're set up, it's like, okay, now we're just going to get in the zone and we're just going to flow. We're going to see how many thousands of feet we can put in the floor of this net today. And then we're going to see what we do tomorrow.
Yeah.
And we're just going to play music and we're going to eat really well. We're going to have good conversations. Maybe we'll take some intentional time to just be in silence. I've been starting to really like doing Dharma talks or like listening to podcasts kind of for like portions of the day.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I don't know, I've been hearing the phrase like learning bouts is around right now, but the flow state is a thing that's hard to maintain. And so much of the process of the creation of nets now is headspace management, right? It's like, how do we facilitate ourselves being in the best headspace and flow to create the best quality net, like the tautest net, the most clean lines, the most elegant surface, the best amount of bounce, the most appropriate position in the location, whatever. Like the design work is turning out to be a lot more part of the process now than it was when we were first starting. Because when we were kids, it was like, oh, we felt like we were Spider-Man. It's like, yeah, we'll throw a rope over here, and we'll throw a rope over there. We'll just bring all that rope together, and it's going to be so tight. Yeah. But now that we're way more on the tautness game, it's like, okay, well, let's plan it out and like think about it. I mean, doing all the stage work, like being a rigger, doing rigging work in a professional environment, and just having like gone on the OSHA standard in the built environment for a decade now. I'm like, okay, I see where there's sense here, and like so much more knowledge of the just materials and what works and what doesn't work, hella techniques for just streamlining and optimizing the process, right? Like the right kinds of efficiencies, but then also being able to get in the zone and just the sort of spontaneous, always just making spontaneous choices. That is what creates the surface that is so see-through. It's like if you're doing it the exact same way, or if it's a repetitive pattern, not only is it never going to be as taut, but it also, you can't see through it because there's now just a repetitive pattern there. So your eye lands on it and it's now a surface.
Yeah, I know. I see what you mean. Like if it was a uniform pattern, then my brain would be putting it together into one shape.
Yep.
But you guys have designed this in a way that it defies our brain's ability to organize it into a uniform. So you're like, by looking at it, it's like a process of your mind seeking to make it into a pattern, and at the same time you're like, just like in nature, you're like forced to observe the minute variations and differences. It's a good place to keep the head. You know, you're like continuously analyzing and problem solving, and
that's it.
I like what you said about, you know, the consciousness, the intention that you're putting into as a team leader with your team. I came and visited you guys on one of your builds recently, and it was just such a happy vibe, you know, the music playing and everyone's joking, and I could just tell that there was a deep level of satisfaction with the crew. You know, because you're, in a way, you're like telling a story through your fingers, right? Like a net is a story. It's like, oh, on March 27th, I was over in this corner, and look at, you know, it's like watching, I don't know if you've ever seen up in like Yosemite, you can see these trees that have like grooves, like mined out of them by beetles. And I remember I was like on an LSD trip with my cousin, and I'm looking at one of these trees and I'm like, it's the history of the bug's life. Like you can literally watch like the path that they took of like burrowing. And I, you know, it was like this, deep psychedelic moment.
Oh yeah.
But like, that's what this net is it's like this history of your efforts and your concentration and your focus. So why not make it a happy one?
It isn't what you do, it's how you do it. Like literally that's the deepest spiritual relationship in my life right now. It's just like, oh yeah, the vibe that I bring to this activity matters more than the activity in that sense. Right? Like we said earlier, right? Like the process of creating the net and the energy that people get to experience, or the experiences that people have by interacting with nets, like that's what we're making. The net is what allows it to happen, and the creativity of building it is super rewarding, and also just pulls. It's a lifestyle, really. Everything about doing it makes you have to work harder and be smarter and stay on point and be focused and stretch and reach and learn. And then the result of that is this place that's never existed that has the functionality of chilling, like literally baked into it, right?
Yeah. What was can you take me to the moment when you decided that you wanted to, you know, make this a business? What was that process like for you? You know, we've touched a lot on like the values and the feeling and the vibe. And I'm just curious, you know, we live in a country that's kind of, I think, like one of the great iterations of the American experiment has been the kind of national celebration of going into business for yourself, taking an idea, deciding it's important enough to try to support yourself with, and then navigating the tension and the multitude of directions that can pull you in while staying on your stokedness.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious for you, like, obviously deep guy, thinks a lot about this stuff. I know for you, like, taking it from an art that was like purely in the philosophical space to a place now where you're like attaching things like monetary value,
for sure,
where you're like thinking about it as an organization. I know that wasn't a light decision for you at all. And I'm just curious how that process was in turning it into a business.
One of the main things that makes it feel sustainable and like a worthwhile endeavor for me is the like, I guess the statement is that the work speaks for itself, right? Every single project we've done has been from a word of mouth reference. And so the rep is the net, right? The rep is me. The rep is the vibe that the crew brings to doing the work, right? People see that, people feel it, people experience the results of it, and they're like, oh, this is cool. Like, I want to tell people about this, that I liked it, or I thought it was cool, or
networking.
Literally. Yeah. And so the business aspect of it has been sort of just coming along for the ride in that sense of like, oh, well, if we are going to take this passion that's like a soul craft, right? Like there's so much about it that for me is like what I would call like a spiritual inquiry, sort of lifestyle of interest in deep questions. And the result of it is creating these really cool, one of a kind, whatever, works of art, but they take hell of time. They take a ton of materials, and as the professionalism has gotten higher and higher, the amount of effort that requires is also elevating. And so that's how I've been able to make the bridge between the sort of like the heart's like soul passion and the more commerce oriented, this is a product for sale vibe is measuring it based off of making our measurements just based off of effort, right? It's like it takes a lot of work to do this. And so that's been the whole process. Like the consultations pretty much are always like someone has heard about it, gets in touch with us. They're like, oh, we've heard that you do this really cool thing, or I saw your piece over wherever in Inverness, or I saw the one in LA. Like, oh, could you come back to Washington and build a net like you did over at these folks' place? And like, so it's been spreading as a word of mouth. And that to me is huge as far as sustainability. It's like, I mean, the joke is that you can't push a rope. I don't think I'll ever get bored of that joke because I think it's so funny. But the nets are capturing people's awareness, or people's attention and interest is drawn into them.
Yeah.
And so then they're talked about, they're shared about. And so my job, I feel like my job, like the way it is a job that is like providing my livelihood at this point, is being someone who's at the leading edge of thinking about how to do it well, and then being able to do it well, right? It's like to rig something that's safe and beautiful and elegant isn't something you can just do, right? Like one day I want to do like be able to show my earliest, like the secret nets that were up in the hills.
Yeah.
Compared to this, it would be unrecognizable actually, right? It's like that. All it is the only thing that those have in common is that they're made of rope.
Right.
Right. So like the amount of sort of trial and error and practice and attention and mistakes and learning and refinement that is represented here in this net has already been transcended by the ones we've done since. And the way in which that is exciting makes it worth continuing to persist in offering it as a service. And then the reputation of it is spreading, and more people are like, oh, well, wow, if you can do it that well, like, could we fund you to do it this well? Right? Or like, hey, like, we're some super chill, small time, like just cool folks that are doing good things for a good reason. Like, is there a way to do it for us? And like how scalable they are is crazy, right? Like we can do them pretty affordably and quickly in small scale settings. Mm-hmm. And it could basically go from like a couple of homies for a couple of hours just busting something all the way to like a museum piece that takes a year to build. Like
right.
The range of potential, what's possible with this concept is vast. And that, how exciting that is to me makes me really motivated to persist in refining it and expanding. Like, what is possible? Like, I'm down to give my life to that question.
I love that. Yeah. It's a beautiful tagline or a beautiful summation. Are there certain trees that are easier to work with than others?
That's where the design work has gotten really fun. Like, because the way it's been working is people are inviting us to just peep game on wherever they're at. And so it's a completely unique project every time. There's also been a funny kind of awkward aspect to it as a business. It's like, well, what's possible is completely different every single time. Yeah. And what we do is completely different every single time. It's never the same net twice, mm-hmm. which until you've experienced nets multiple times wouldn't mean anything to you, right?
Right.
Or if your perception of nets is a patterned thing that's like kind of saggy, then you're like, well, you could do this anywhere, right? And you can.
Yeah.
And if you want it to be hell of taut and bouncy and make sense in the place that it's at, that requires a lot more sort of sophisticated preparation and design. The idea for us is like, the goal is that it looks like it's always been there. And that's the measure of success, right?
Timelessness.
Does this feel like it's always been here?
Yeah.
Like it grew here.
Yeah. I couldn't picture this space without it. It's pretty cool.
Well, exactly. Right. It's like, oh yeah. And that's the experience that is the actual gift of the product is like, you're going to sit out here, you're going to sit here, you're going to lean back and be like, wow, like, duh.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
duh, yeah.
Like it feels obvious after you've checked it out.
Yeah.
But if you were describing it before having experienced it, it would be a stretch. And that's why it's art, right? It's not just a thing you can take a picture of and sell online. It's something that has stories and energy and there's a whole worldview and a whole lifestyle that is possible with this concept.
Mm-hmm.
And so sharing that with people and just getting better and better at articulating it and creating it that's the move, really.
Yeah. And I know that's something that you've definitely communicated with me about as we've sought to think about, as a business, how do you market something like this? Just in the interview, seeing like how difficult it is to surmise or almost, antithetical to your philosophy regarding what the experience is. It's like, I think that, that a similar level of creativity and innovation needs to be implied in how and what part of the story is going to be told, and how much of the experience you want to be explicit before you get in the net versus like how do you tell someone, like you said in the beginning of this podcast, how do you get someone excited about an experience that they've never had before without giving away and thus narrowing the parameters of what the experience can be for them? And that's an interesting problem to have to solve. I think that there is a way to do it.
Yeah.
And that's what's exciting to me about the prospect of us making something to that end is that, like I was saying in the beginning as well, it's an interesting problem that I know is going to like force me to innovate and think outside the box, think outside the net.
Ooh, don't put your net in a box.
Exactly. But it's a worthy thing, like I love it because they've played such a big role in my life.
Right. I mean, that's it, right? The feeling of amazement that you have from 15 years ago or something, like that's still here, right here in this moment with us right now, right? Like,
yeah.
That stoke is alive still. And that matters. Like that has value.
Yeah, dude. I mean, just the fact that when I started this project of podcasting and I went and made my short list of guests, you were like right at the top. I was like, we got to do a net, dude. Like, that just seems like such a cool place to do a podcast.
I think we're gonna do a lot more of this kind of stuff too. Dude. I mean, like, as the word is getting out, and as the team builds, and as like the crew that are people that are interested and invested in the feeling of being amazed as something that has merit. I mean, that's really what we're here to do, is just elevate the feeling of being amazed, because that's a vibe that humans can bring to the world that isn't harming.
Yes. I'm curious, because we're starting to lose light, so I don't know how much longer we can go before we'll be in complete darkness. We got an owl.
We got the owl too. That could be the time.
For sure. I guess we'll all, to end it on a question, or to throw one last little subject before we wrap things up. For people that listen to this conversation and they're like titillated by the idea of experiencing a net, like, how is there a direction you would point people towards in their own educational ambitions? Like, how does someone, short of, hiring you to build the net,
right?
Is there a way for the layman to experience, if not, firsthand, but at least, like, is there a source that you feel, good about pointing people towards that gives them some sort of understanding of what it is that we've been talking about this whole time?
Right.
Maybe it's this podcast. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, as far as like resources, it's like there aren't really that many, right? The goal I have is to keep refining and getting this project to be at a level where we can start putting them in public places. Because that's been the whole trip, is like, we're really good at doing this now. Where should they go?
Right. And
going in places where anybody can just rock up on it one time and chill. That's really the highest level. Private backyards is fine. I mean, there's the bread and butter of like creating works of art for clients, and there's a lot of value there. But the thing about the idea wants to go, and you do it yourself, figure it out, have fun, like, be in that feeling of amazement, and just be cognizant of safety and be cognizant of environment and impact. But the main thing is just move slowly and be close to wild places, and let that enthusiasm of that be what leads you on, because it's really all about just the question, like, what are the good questions? Is like,
every good question generates 10 more.
Well, that's it. And it's like, and that's where the feeling of amazement comes alive. And
sure.
Just hang out there and then do whatever makes sense at the time. That's
pretty
much what I've done. Yeah.
Climb a tree,
Go climb a tree. Yeah. Sit quietly, listen, take care of your body, get enough sleep. It's really like, the lifestyle is just about following through on the stoke, right? It's like,
follow through on the stoke. Righteous. Well, dude, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on
Thank you, sir.
The Bardcast. Andrew Castle, everybody.
Bardcast.
How can people connect with you, reach you, find your net business? What's the best way to connect?
The project is called Be in Tree Nets, and we're using the internet in the form of website and Instagram by that name, Be in Tree Nets. And
okay. That's the handle on Instagram?
Yeah, it's like I've been doing it on the phone just because it's easy. But I mean, as the project grows, that's part of our whole shit too. It's like, there's a conversation happening that's way bigger than just the nets, and bigger than me, and bigger than the crew. So the invitation is just come be part of the conversation, and or go have your own conversations with trees and chill.
Yes.
The main thing is that people should be chilling.
People should be chilling. And what's the website that people can...
It's the same name, Be in Tree Nets, but it's .com over there.
www.beintreenets.com. Awesome. Well,
World Wide Web.
Dude, chilling ain't easy, but this has felt pretty easy and awesome. And I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. And we got to do this again soon.
Let's do a sunrise version next.
Let's do it.
Yeah, get up higher in a tree at sunrise.
I'll wake up before sunrise for that, for sure.
Totally. Exactly.
Oh yeah, dude. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Until the next one. What was the statement that you said about
perspective is everything?
Perspective is everything. Love you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.